Welcome to part 3 of my river tank build. In my previous video we set up a dirted substrate on the left hand side of the tank and a plenum on the right. So now we need to just finish off those two areas. So first up, I'm putting some oyster grit in, which will help stabilize my pH. Probably really need more than this, but it's all I had. Next up, I add some fish food. This will hopefully enable my bacteria to feed until such time as I have fish. I then added a couple of ground up root tabs. We cannot forget the mixture of water and soil that we obtain from the stream bed. Hopefully that will contain plenty of bacteria and maybe a few other goodies. To top it off, we'll add some bacteria from one of my established tanks. And the easiest way is to just grab the filter sponge and give it a rinse out into the tank. After which we should allow this to settle and then bake at 360 degrees for approximately 45 minutes. Allow it to cool and then serve with ice cream. Whoops, sorry, wrong recipe. We'll now jump over to the plenum side and build up that sand barrier at the front. For good measure, I added some of the sponge filter water. The bog iron and its bacteria was then added. I had no idea how much to put in, so in the end I put in about 3/4 of the container. This layer was now ready to be covered by substrate. I chose pumice and I put it into mesh bags, which would mean if I ever break down the tank, then I could just lift out each bag of pumice, no problem at all, and I could then store that for reuse in another project. The actual clay underneath would probably turn to mush and would not be salvageable. And having the pumice in bags also would help to constrain it, and this would be a benefit when I start building the weight above it. On the side of the tank with the dirted substrate, I covered up the soil with sand. I built this up to a depth of about 3 times that of the actual soil. I then saturated with water to ensure that the bacteria on both sides would not dry out. So it's time to do some planning just to see how this little project will come together. So at the moment we've got the basic tank. So we've added the substrate and we need to build up. So we've got to remember that on the left we're going to have planting. That'll be mainly grass type plants, Vallisneria, dwarf sage, some hairgrass, and perhaps a crypt. We're going to have gravel or stones on the right hand side. So to get some flow into the tank, I'll use the hang-on back filter. The water from that is basically going to come out of the filter and work its way down to the left hand side and probably to the bottom. Now if we take a look down view from the top, I basically want the water to come out of the filter and go around in a circular motion like that. So ideally it's going to come from the hang-on back and across the front in that direction, and that gives the fish something to swim up against. So to help with that, I've got a piece of wood which essentially is going to represent a tree stump, and it's going to sit in this sort of position. It's going to be fairly tight against the hang-on back. This area is going to be a little bit of a choke point, and essentially I want the water to flow around like so. Now to help with that, along the back here somewhere I'm going to put a power head. Excuse my drawing. So that will assist with that water flow, and it will also mean that I don't need to have the hang-on back running 24/7. I can just switch that on when I want to add the effect of more rapids or faster water flow. So you end up with this sort of situation here. And to help along here, I've got a piece of driftwood which I'll take from another tank, and that has got a lot of Java fern on it, a visual if not a physical barrier, and help with that water circulation. So I've got a couple of things to consider with this build. One is the weight of these rocks. I've only got 6mm glass, and there's going to be a lot of pressure inserted on that. And also, to prevent scratches on the glass as much as I can, I want to put a buffer zone of sand. Now to support the rocks I need to build some sort of platform underneath. Now if I have it on a slope, these rocks over time will roll down to the bottom with the force of the water. So I need to try to get the rocks to stay in place. I need some type of platform which will need to have steps. So to go something like this, and that means I can put the weight of the rocks on this, I suppose you could call it a ladder, on this ladder, and that should help prevent them from rolling down the hill. Now that reminds me of when I went to the South Island and I visited a hydroelectric scheme. So in 1930 construction started on a dam on the Waitaki River, So you had the dam, which was about 36 metres high. It's about, 118 or so feet. And that actually opened in 1934. But 11 workers had lost their lives during that construction phase. So the river itself ran down, and behind it was the lake that was formed. For about 5 years after that opening, thousands of fish had swum upstream, and these were the likes of native fish, eels, salmon and the likes, trying to get to their spawning grounds. And all of these fish had accumulated at the base of this dam and eventually died because they just could not get upstream. Now the powers that be in their wisdom built a fish ladder into the side of the dam, and that was basically quite a long construction of steps. Able the fish to migrate up the stream by jumping up these steps just as they would for rapids, and then go to their spawning ground. But what happened was the fish didn't use it, and it took them a while to actually work out why these fish did not use this ladder. And apparently the answer was that these fish swam up on this side of the river, along adjacent to the bank. So they never knew the fish ladder was there, in the sense that they never came across it. But once they got to the dam, all they could do was swim in circles until they died. So the idea of fish ladder was good, but it failed. It's sort of an example of how you need to do careful planning. Here we have the tree stump. It's been soaking in this water for almost 3 weeks, and it just doesn't want to sink. It's heavy. I can only presume that it's so dense that moisture's just not getting into it, in which case it should be fairly safe for the aquarium. Next step, to give it a clean. The clean had not made much difference. There was very little biofilm growing on the wood, again making me think it will be suitable for the tank. The original intention was that this would protrude above the water and I'd have moss and other bits and pieces growing from it. But we're going into winter and our house does get condensation. So in the end I decided I would use the glass lids of the tank, and that would keep in the heat and keep in most of the moisture, but it would mean I'll have to cut this in half. I cut the large piece in half so the top half would fit in the tank, but unfortunately it tended to just basically split, disintegrate. So it's lost all its impact. Even with 3 weeks underwater, the actual water has barely penetrated the timber. Along these split lines it's gone in a little bit, but the rest of the timber is bone dry. So I'm going to have to figure out another way of holding this piece down so it doesn't float. And I'm thinking the best thing is I'll just put silicone on the bottom and silicone a tray to it, and I can load stones around that tray to hold it. Otherwise I could drill a couple of holes in and use a tie and attach it to something heavy. I'll just have to think about this. This is what I've decided to do. I've taken the top piece and cut a little notch out, and I've taken a piece of the bottom, done the same, just a smooth edge, and those two I'll silicone together, hopefully it'll hold, and other little pieces can go on. He's there or up there or there. So I could end up with a fairly interesting piece of wood coming out. But how to hold it down? It's bone dry even though it's wet. So I've got a little tray, I'll put some holes in to let air bubbles out, and I'll silicone that. And I'll silicone together like that, they'll be like so. I'll put some holes in the top of that one so I can poke some Anubias or Java fern in there and let that grow. Same, I've got one on the side there as well. Here will be the rocks. So that will need to go further back that way, won't it? So the rocks are going to come down to meet this level. So they'll probably extend in there, so there's no hard and fast border. And then over here I'll have some driftwood. I've currently got some soaking in the pond. So how's that look? It's definitely not very wide, the tank. Well, when I say wide, from front to back, not very deep front to back. So a little bit limited is what I can do. So those are the two pieces I had. I tend to favour this one on the right. But let's go and see, they're both a bit slimy, so that's okay, that's just biofilm. Okay, so that's one piece I've got. Lengthwise, I probably need to cut it about there. And that part there, that part on the left would have the plants growing through it. Height-wise, it's quite good. So if I'm looking at side on, yeah, there's enough interest in those branches. I've just been rearranging another layer of bags. This is a much finer pumice, and it's basically enabled me to level things out. It will go in the corner. And that will go in about that position. But it's got to clear the top. Let's have a look at that. So it's got to go down a little bit. Well, what have I been doing? Filling up containers of sand. These are going to be part of the substrate as packing blocks, I suppose you could call them. And I'll fill these up with water to make sure there's no air in there. Just need a bit of temporary support there. So I thought I'd repurpose my old fluval pump. It's a little bit noisy, but it might be okay. We'll just see how it goes. And that's going to pump water through this tubing. And there's a 90-degree bend in there. And another 90-degree bend there. So it'll come out over the top. I need to figure out some way of stopping all the sand in it from getting sucked into this. And that should do it. And this pump has its own little foam filter inside anyway, so I think it's going to be good protection. Should work. So the pump will be down here. Feed in, water out. Short power cords are so annoying. So this bag gave me these rocks here. These ones are ones I'd like to use. A lot of these are broken, but may use some of them. And I got a bag of smaller ones which I've just washed, so they'll normally be the same colour as the others. So these are going to be mainly to hold things in place. So this is what it's looking like. The black weed matting is so you cannot see the white of the polystyrene box. The little pump that I've got in there is trying to push water through two 90-degree bends, so it's not going to come out with much flow. Unfortunately, I just didn't have any soft tubing that I could have used, but I'll be relying on the hang-on back for my water supply. But I struck a problem with that as well, as it won't self-prime at the level of water that I wanted in the tank. So plan B will have to be that I put in extra rocks and raise that riverbed substantially. It will mean I'm not going to see much of my wood stump, and the unknown that I've got is, will that wood stump stay down? And especially that polystyrene box, I suspect it's going to want to float. Plus, will all the rocks that I put in stay in place? I guess I'll find out next week. Thanks for watching.